If you have been lucky enough to go there, I will bet that you have a New Orleans story. New Orleans is a contradictory sort of place, full of both poverty and pride, deep faith, and a remarkable reputation for debauchery. Dave's grandmother, my husband's grandmother, was originally from Louisiana, born in Natchitoches, which before I got married, I thought was pronounced Natchitoches. And then she moved to New Orleans, so it's a sentimental place for us. When we were young and foolish, David Morehous proposed to me at a restaurant in the French Quarter. Now, I admit I was a little suspicious that evening, as he insisted on wearing a sport coat to dinner, and it was August, and about 6 million degrees outside. But I thought he was just a little warm, as opposed to really nervous. Next to us was a whole table full of Italians who spoke absolutely no English, but they figured out what was going on, and they serenaded us loudly in Italian and toasted us over and over, not very soberly. I love the ways in which we accidentally end up in other people's stories. Somewhere, there are some Italians who even now can tell the story of being at dinner in New Orleans, only to be surprised by a random engagement at the next table. New Orleans is the kind of city that begs us to tell stories about it. If only the funny ones. But the story that we saw unfold is not the kind we want to have to tell. It's a hard story with random suffering. It's the kind of story we want to make it make sense, except that it doesn't. Because some things, they don't make any sense at all. Sometimes it's easy to fall down the hole of bad theology, if only to help us feel as if the world makes more sense that way. We've heard some of those kinds of sayings, or we've said them ourselves. It must have been part of God's plan. You can see how this might be comforting. But what kind of God does that hold up? Random violence is not part of God's plan for any of God's people. But it's easy to fall into fictions, especially when they comfort us. There, but for the grace of God, go I. The people who were hurt, or the people who died, they have just as much access to God's grace as do we. As the people who were just barely missed do too. When something terrible happens, whether it's to someone we love, or even someone we don't know, or when we have a near miss, we want to attribute it to God's saving hand. Don't mishear me. I do believe in God's saving hand. But who lives and who dies, that's not a measure of God's love and favor. God does not love those who survived more than those who died. I believe in God's justice, yes, even in God's judgment. But I don't believe that that means that God plays games with the lives of his beloved children in this world or the next. But still, if it only made it make more sense, if only God could help us make it make sense. So into this week we've had comes the light of Epiphany, the story of the improbable travelers who seek out the child who is Jesus, who follow a star for years to find where he rests, so that they too, they can worship and adore him. And along the way, they encounter evil. Herod and his lies and his false assurances. When the wise men, the Magi, they return home by another way without reporting back to Herod, he is so furious that he takes the lives of the children in his kingdom just to protect his own power. Every child 2 years old and younger is killed, just to assuage the anxiety of a man who is desperate to hold onto his kingdom. There is no making sense of things that are so terrible. But there is still good news. Even in a hard world where hard things happen, the star still shows those wise men the way. Even in the middle of painful and trying times, there are still gifts to be offered and the way of God to lift up. Even in the frightening and the very hard circumstances of that time, Jesus still draws the wise men, draws us towards him. These Gentiles from far away, they follow the star, and they find not only illumination, but transformation. They are changed by what they have seen. We too, we can be changed by an encounter with the living God. In the times in which we live, it can be a struggle to find hope when hard news drops into our laps, when very real tragedies happen. A very dear person I know who's having a hard time right now said to me that they're finding it hard to not just end up in a state of pure meanness and spite. It's always tempting, isn't it, to meet hate with hate. But that isn't the life to which Jesus calls us. Jeremiah gives us a vision of the kingdom. I'm going to bring them from the land of the north and gather them from the farthest parts of the earth. Among them the blind and the lame, those with child and those in labor together, a great company. They shall return here. With weeping they shall come, and with consolations I will lead them back. I will let them walk by brooks of water in a straight path in which they shall not stumble. That's a king worth following, not Herod, stuck in his own greed and his vain glory, but the king who has been born to us again, the king to whom we can offer our gifts, not just our gold and frankincense and myrrh, but all the gifts we possess, even our very selves. This is one of our communion prayers in Rite One says, we offer ourselves, our souls and bodies. We can trust God with our very lives in this life and into the next. And that doesn't mean that we are freed from hard things or from suffering. It doesn't work that way, unfortunately. A life following Jesus Christ, it doesn't mean one that is free of all ills. But a life lived following Jesus Christ gives us the chance to lean toward hope, to know that we are loved, even in suffering and grief, to know that even now we are being transformed by the same Jesus Christ who came to transform death into life, so that we may know that death does not have the last word in the kingdom of Jesus Christ, to know that Jesus calls us to live lives of hope, yes, of love, to push back and to not bow to the kingdoms of darkness. Jesus Christ already defeated those. Jesus comes to show us his glory, to help us to see, even when tragedy comes to cities that we know and love and people that we know and love. Jesus promises us even now that evil will not have the last word and that we can still participate in life in him and it is a freed and a hopeful life in Jesus Christ. Epiphany comes every year so that we might see Jesus Christ anew, might find him lowly and loving, still a child in his parents' arms, but it is still the same Jesus who will grow and who will work miracles, who will heal and teach and patiently, gloriously love like no other could. Epiphany is not just a time for the wise men. It's a time for all God's people to see Jesus anew, to look for, to follow the star that leads the way, to show up for Jesus Christ as he reveals his glory to us, whether we understand or not, whether we even are sure if we believe or not. Still, Jesus shines forth for us. All of us who have seen his star, we too, we can be overwhelmed with joy, even on a dark day. We too, we are being changed in his likeness from one glory to another. The light that is Jesus Christ, that light shines in the darkness always, and the darkness will never overcome it. Amen.